This is not a screen name asks, I'd like to know more about Grant's work on R2 if you have any anecdotes about it. Aw, yeah. Well, I mean, so Grant Imahara worked on R2 as early as the mid 90s as electronics help for Don B's. So back then, there were no prequels. In the mid 90s, uh, there was an R2, there was, I think, a dozen or so R2s at the ranch, and some in probably one in George's office. If I was George, I'd have one in my office. And some of those R2s were original aluminum R2s built by Norek Engineering. Some of them were fiberglass R2s built by Tony Dyson, who built, I think, 6 or 8 R2D2s for Empire. I don't know if any new ones were built for Jedi. I can't quite remember that. But by the mid-90s, there was one working R2 that they utilized for appearances, and there was one like mostly working one. And again, this is before we had the robot marketplaces, which BattleBots and the maker community have brought into being, that make doing work like maintaining an R2D2 so much easier. Back then, it was not nearly as easy. Servos weren't as high powered as they are, and being able to integrate motors and speed controls and computer systems and feedback loops, etc., it was a much more complicated job. And Grant was vat grown to fill in and help Don B's with those, and ended up becoming, as you might or might not know, he ended up becoming C-3PO for a number of years for Lucasfilm appearances. In fact, contractually was required to maintain a certain weight. He had to like drink Slim Fast every day to fit into that 3PO costume. Yeah, that's freaking cool. In 98 or 99, I think, a few of us started chatting, and we realized that the Kenny Baker R2, it sat over there in D building for a couple of years, just sitting in one part of the building because they didn't need it for anything. And the Kenny Baker R2, it stood upright, right? Didn't have a third leg, because that's the one, whenever R2 does it, like, that was Kenny inside. So the Kenny Baker R2 had, you could see at the sides, and you can actually see this in the shot. Sometimes you can catch a glimpse of Kenny's pant legs. Not quite, but R2's feet had sneakers in them, mounted in them, and that's where Kenny's legs slipped through and slipped into the sneakers so that he could actually like do that R2 business. And a few of us, Grant included, and myself and some other model makers, started to make measurements off of that R2. And we wanted to make our own. Now, we didn't want to violate the terms of our employment, so we didn't use any of the original parts to make our own. We simply took all the measurements we could, and then we hand built slowly, methodically, our own R2D2. And the goal was that each of us would take some parts, and then we'd each make a mold of those parts and supply castings to the other members of this Romeo Delta group. The measurements from that R2 somehow made their way to the R2D2 Builders Group and helped kickstart that fandom. But the one thing I will tell you is that if you start to measure R2D2s too carefully, you will end up with a wide spreadsheet of measurements, because no two R2D2s from the film series are quite identical to each other. They are all just a little bit different. And that kind of tempers one's need for hyper veracity, because there's no such thing. It is not a target. It is more like a shady gray area that you could try and shoot towards the middle of. I remember what I do know is that Grant finished his R2 just a few months ago, and it still sits there in the same building that Funko's in. I don't know what plans they have for that R2. And I'm sorry I didn't have a specific Grant Imahara anecdote about the R2, just that, like, that level of commingled fandom and employment and professionalism, that was one of my favorite parts about working at ILM. And Grant and I were very similar in that regard of, like, both loving the parts and pieces of the universe and also making them and being part of the engine that produced that universe. Someone whose name is It's Already Rendered asks, what future tech in the Star Wars universe would you like to see become reality now? Lightsabers. That's an easy one. I mean, flying cars, I think we'll have those pretty soon. And I'm really glad that we'll have autonomous flying cars, because I don't want human beings flying those things. Not by a long shot. Land speeders. No, land speeders would be great. But lightsabers. Is there anything else? I mean, look, I'd love to be able to jump into a spaceship and fly between planets. I don't think that's going to happen quite soon. Lightsabers. Dude, could you imagine? I mean, I would imagine if you were a really training Jedi, it would be years before you handed them a lightsaber. It would be years of training before you handed them a lightsaber, because there are few things more dangerous that you could possibly imagine a human being holding than a lightsaber, right? Like you fall asleep with it in your hand and you cut your couch in half. These things they're not to be toyed with. It is very disconcerting that Obi-Wan just hands Luke one. I mean, I know he's got the Force and everything, but still. Okay. This is, wow, we're already at 1 hour and 6 minutes. This is my last question. M. Johnson says, Adam! Exclamation point. At the end of Series 1, we see the Darksaber in Mandalorian. Yes, Giancarlo Esposito, who is now like the go-to villain in all shows, right? Because he just showed up in The Boys, Season 2, and he's on Mandalorian and Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, right? Like, I think Giancarlo's business card should just say, villain. What a great actor to be a regular villain. He is so scary and wonderful. So what is your, we see the Darksaber in Mandalorian. What's your relationship to the Star Wars Legends universe? And how do you feel about it showing up in more mainstream live action Star Wars stuff? Again, you're asking me a question that goes way beyond my institutional knowledge about Star Wars, because I don't know the Legends universe. I know there's Clone Wars, there's all sorts of other franchises that I have not taken in. That being said, I feel fine about it showing up in more mainstream Star Wars stuff. I don't mind that stuff at all. Look, George and Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni and all of the amazing directors of the Season 1 of Mando and Season 2 and John Knoll and all of those guys, they love the universe and they love telling stories from that universe. So their whole goal isn't servicing one portion of the franchise versus another. It's taking in the entirety of the whole thing and giving us some great stories to enjoy. And when they come across a MacGuffin a MacGuffin like the Darksaber, I don't know whether it's a MacGuffin or not, but R2D2 is certainly a MacGuffin. He's actually, I think, the most famous and biggest MacGuffin ever in film, but that's just my opinion. But these folks, their goal is just to tell great stories and get us involved in those great stories. So I loved seeing the end of Mandalorian and learning that there was a thing called the Darksaber and then going to research it and seeing that it comes from here. And like, that's awesome, man. That's just, I don't have any problem or issues at all with that kind of excursion. I look forward to a future where fan fiction could yield things that production could use and everyone could make some money along the way. And here we are back to where I started, which is talking about copyright law and fair use. I think it's really, really one of my favorite things about the Star Wars universe or any big franchise universe, Marvel, Twilight, Star Wars, Star Trek, is all of the different ways that fans engage with those franchises. And the fandom goes way farther than any of the creators of any of those franchises could have possibly imagined. And the transformative artwork that fandom then exercises on those franchises, where they write their own fiction, they write their own stories, they design their own costumes, they come up with alternate other storylines. That stuff is all really important and vital and amazing. That's beautiful and to be celebrated. And I love that people can take these franchises and make them their own and make it feel like they're a part of their lives and share and exult with each other on, whether it's fan fiction on the Kindle or deviant art that people are drawing or STLs that people are 3D printing for each other. So I'm a big believer in the huge melting pot that everyone can eat from. Like that's to me, that's the ideal. And I don't think walling off any of that benefits anybody. Thank you. That was a stunning set of questions. And it feels like I've only spent about 15 minutes talking, but I can see now that it's been 70 minutes. So thank you guys for joining me for this live chat. We will be doing more soon, and you can follow us on Tested and our YouTube channel to learn when these are happening, to become a contributing member. There are links in the comments below for doing that. And for those existing members who are contributing and helping us keep the lights on and keep builds coming through here, I say thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you all for attending this live stream. Again, for me, it makes the world feel a little less lonely. And I really appreciate the interaction. I appreciate the conversation, and I miss it. And I can't wait till I can see so many of you at the next live con that we go to together, whenever that is. Hopefully sooner rather than later, but let's all stay safe. In the meantime, I think the very next con that will happen will include a lot of costumes that have masks built right in. I'm just throwing that out there. So start thinking about your mask-based cosplay. And I think that's where the sweet spot will be. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe. Wear your masks. Take care of each other. And I send love and virtual hugs. Yay! Okay, let's end the stream.